Okay, so hopefully this is going to work out for me. This is my first time on this platform, I think, much like many people today. So hopefully it won't be disastrous and I'll be able to manipulate this fairly well. So my name is Joanna Thompson-Anselm, and I'm the head of geography at Milliken Mills High School in Markham, Ontario, with the YRDSB. Thanks, Paul, and hello. Um, and I'm also the curriculum project coordinator for OAGEE, which is our provincial body for geography in Ontario. When I was asked if I would like to participate and to present today, I wasn't sure what I could talk about because I wasn't sure that I had something that was in line with the theme about telling a story. And when I thought about telling stories, the thought that came across my mind here was, I do use storytelling from time to time. I would say in my classroom, but I don't use it a lot. So I wasn't really sure what I was going to talk about. But the more I started to think about, what do I have to talk about? I thought about, I have an interesting path about how I came to become the geographer that I always wanted to be and the educator I always wanted to be. And it has been fraught with some disaster and some success along the way. And I find that when I have new staff that come into our department, it's my stories of disaster that people actually enjoy, and they say, thank you for sharing something that blew up in your face. Thank you for telling us about, what really happened when you tried something new, because it gives me courage to try too. And so I think that that's the story that I'm going to tell today, and have you think about, how did you come to the table to be a geography teacher, if you are a geography teacher, or to be interested in geography or even just education in general. So I want to put it out there that what I can't offer you today, or I'm not going to offer you today, really is like a full lesson plan about something or a prepared activity, right? Like I just give that to you, or a unit of study and articles for students to read. And I realize we come because we want those things. And I do have those things, and you can always email me and I can share those resources. But I think today is more for me about offering you an idea or a possibility for you to go on your own journey, and maybe some inspiration to take a risk in your classroom and to try something new, and to show you how that can bring about some really awesome rewards, right? So really, it's an honest story about how I became the geography teacher that I wanted to be. And so when I thought about, storytelling, I thought about, well, why is it that we tell people stories to begin with? Is it, to see theory in action? I think people want to see that, to see how something plays out, to entertain people, to teach a lesson about something, to provide the audience with an opportunity to do some self-reflection and to make their own meaning from somebody else's story and how that resonates with them. And also maybe to offer comfort or inspiration or courage to take action about something. And I think that the two that I've highlighted here in yellow, these are the things that I tend to do, right? So to entertain, when I'm in my classroom, I have told students stories about things that have happened to me. So in a travel and tourism class, I have told them about places that I have gone, like almost getting kidnapped in Thailand, about, missing the ferry in Thailand because we didn't realize it doesn't actually stop. It just comes, close, and you're supposed to hop on, and we didn't realize that, or like some stories about places that I have been, because I find that students will tune in when I talk about things like that. Or the other thing is, again, offering professional development and talking about some of the things that I've tried and that haven't worked for me, but what I've learned from that and the confidence that I've gotten to keep moving forward. So, in the chat, why don't we talk a little bit about how and why did you become a geography teacher? So you could talk about that and just post it in the chat, just so we kind of get a sense of who's in our room, and if you are a geography teacher or you're somebody who's interested in geography. Um, and maybe if you are a geography teacher, what's your identity as a geographer? So if you had to tell somebody, I'm a geographer, how would you describe yourself and your interests, or who has influenced you the most? Or what is your identity as an educator in general? If maybe you're not a geography teacher, maybe just, an educator with an interest in geography and environmental science and studies and outdoors and stuff like that. What is your story? So let's just take a minute and pop some ideas into the chat about who you are. Oh, yes, Jocelyn, you're going to be teaching geography this fall. That's awesome. That's right. I did hear about that. That's awesome. So if somebody asked you, what is your identity as an educator? What is your identity as a geographer? Who has influenced you? What would you say about that? Ah, yes, people are shy. Also, too, it's not something that maybe right off the bat, because it was something I had to sit and think about as well, right? So, you know, I don't know, math specialist Suzanne, I will be teaching geography for the first time in order to believe help. Okay. Some of the things I might talk about today, you might be like, this is very overwhelming, but it might excite you and get you thinking about things you can do in your classroom too. So Debbie says, I've done a great deal of travel and find learning about different cultures, places, foods, their space is exciting. Me too. Fascinating, humbling that we live in Canada. Yeah, I feel like that too. I'm very thankful when I come home as well. I think a lot about living in Canada and how pleased I am that I live here. I love geography since I was young. Love learning about the world. Influences have been many, I guess. Yeah. All right. 14 years as an OT, going into my second year full-time teaching. Yay! I really enjoy geography as a student. I love teaching now because students just think it's maps. I know. And burning out the blue while we're coloring stuff in, even though a lot of us are using ArcGIS. Got it. Yeah. Fell in love with the stories for sure. I think stories are important, right? Other people's stories about how they've come to certain places for sure. Passionate geography teacher. Yes, me too. In high school, sparked my interest in the subject. Yes. Continued on, completed geography degree in social studies. Most teachers have a history background. Geography is not really focused on. Currently teaching senior socials in IB. Me too. I teach IB geography as well. Awesome. Great. Well, we've got like a number of different reasons, why we've come to the table as geography people. So my influence, I think that people in my family knew that I was going to be a geography person before I knew I was going to be a geography person. So I'm sorry, some of my things have shifted here since I very quickly loaded this onto a Google presentation. This is actually an atlas that my grandmother gave me in 1988 for my 8th Christmas. And I was kind of like, oh, this is an interesting present. She ordered a lot of things, like through mail and stuff like that. So she ordered this big atlas for me, and she said, may your imagination always be alive to take you wherever you want to go. And I loved going through that atlas. I would like thumb through it, and I'd find these different places that, I was like, why are there mountains here? And I'd love to climb up those mountains. And there seemed to be a lot of people over in this area. I actually have it open to a page of the USSR. And it's like, I'll probably not use this atlas again, but I'm holding on to it anyway, because it holds this meaning for me. And so I remember going through this and thinking about places I was going to go. And then my other grandparents, they lived on the Bruce Peninsula. And so I went hiking a lot. And when I got older, I wanted to see more of the Bruce Peninsula. I wanted to go and see the caves. I wanted to go see the cliffs. And I camped there a lot. And I just wanted to be outdoors all the time. But it was funny how my grandmother kind of knew that I was going in this direction even before I did. And then, I ended up getting to high school, and I didn't understand what geography was. It wasn't really clearly explained what this subject is about when I was in elementary school. And then when I got to high school, I took grade 9 geography, and then because you have to, and then I didn't take it again for the longest time, and I kind of took world issues, grade 12 geography on a whim. And I didn't really know what it was about, but I knew that I wasn't good in math. I wasn't good in science, and I needed to get some OAC courses, those grade 13 courses that we had in Ontario. I needed some of these things so that I could go on into university. I was like, oh, I like learning about, stuff that's going on in other places of the world. Why not? I will take that. And that is where I met this gentleman here, Craig Meikle, and he was my geography teacher for 2 years. So I took a grade 12 course, world issues, and then I took another course that was another geography course in OAC. And again, I was starting to understand what geography was about, but he was probably the most engaging person I've ever met. This is somebody who could talk for 75 minutes and you never get bored. he would tell you these stories about places, all over the planet. And he would tell you about his family, and he would tell you about fails that he had in education. And we'd all kind of have like a laugh about it. And you went to class every day because you wanted to be part of his story. He was just the most engaging person ever. But perhaps one of the best things about him is that he knew all of his students. He knew them. Relationships mattered. It was really important to him. He used to comment to me and say, "Oh, Thompson, I saw you driving that van. Wow, you really know how to back that van up. Good for you." And I was like, "Thank you, Mr. Meikle. My dad told me I have to learn how to back up the van to be a good driver." But he just knew his students. And so you wanted to go and you wanted to learn. It didn't matter what he was teaching about, you wanted to be there. And he worked very hard to engage us. Right. So his stories were really great, but he tried a number of activities. And so this picture that I have here was actually at his retirement party. So I went on to become a geography teacher. So again, I had a really good geography teacher in high school too. And we kept in touch. And I tell this story oftentimes, when I'm talking about what my influences were. And I believe that people are put in your path for a reason. And I believe he was put in my path for a reason. So he kind of set me on this journey of, I think I want to be a geography teacher, because up until this time, I actually wanted to be a French teacher until I met this gentleman. So he was very, very important in my life. So the other thing too is thinking about our identity as like an educator, right? And how did we come to the table to be an educator, and why did we want to be one? And so I went to York and I did the concurrent program where you do your both your degrees at the same time. And you actually had to interview to get into that program. And I can remember the interviewer asked me, "So why do you want to be a teacher?" And I said, "I want to be there for when the light goes on, when a student has struggled with something for a long period of time, or, when they've discovered something really exciting, they've had this great experience. There's that moment of like learning and excitement that you can just read all over their body. And I want to be there for that, right? I don't want to be the reason for it. I just want to soak it all in while it's happening." And I think about that often when I'm planning my lessons, right? I think about why it is that I wanted to be an educator, and that's like a core value to me. I wanted to be part of that learning moment. So I just want to pause here for a minute and ask you, why was it that you wanted to be a teacher? This is all going somewhere, I promise, that I'm asking about this. So if you want to pop something in the chat about why it is that you wanted to be a teacher, I would love to see. Wanting to influence and open kids' eyes to the world around us, always since I've been young. I felt like that too. My dad often recounts stories of me having my teddy bears lined up on chairs and teaching them in my bedroom. They were an easy crowd. Needed to change after a career in real estate. Felt like I was not making a difference in the world while finishing my degree. Yeah. I've come across many people who've changed their careers later on. Yeah. Help my students be creative, truthful, and decent. The joy when students make connections and learn to love learning. Yes. And that it can be challenging sometimes too. And you got to work through that. The relationship building with students that, yeah, you talk about with your former geography teacher. Yes. It makes you feel important, right? As a student, and you walk away and you really take that with you and are happy. Yeah. Having conversations with students, learning from them. Yes. Agreed. We are there to learn too. Take old textbooks home that my school was throwing out and teaching my poor younger sister all the time. I love that too. I would grab things like that as well. Anything that was going out that had information in it, I was always asking for things like that too. Yep. I love helping students find their voice. Yeah. Help them feel like they matter. Yep. The interactions person could make the students stop and think and observe. Yes. Yeah, like what's around us, right? Really like being mindful, being present and taking those things in for sure. I think that there's been a lot more of that since COVID has happened. I know I don't know. I've often said, I said this to my students before. I said this to my husband as well. I'm like, did you ever notice there's so many birds? Like, I hear the birds so much now. And I'm like, is it just this year, or is it that they've always been there, but we're so busy that we just stop thinking about, the birds and the fact that the leaves are falling at the end of August and stuff like that. So I think that's important too. Yeah, seeing the connections in our world for sure. So for me, everything was really about engagement. Like I wanted students to like coming to my class. I wanted them to be there. I wanted them to like just really enjoy every moment that they were there. And they were like, wow, that class went quickly and I really had a good time. That was my reason for being for the longest time in the classroom. So, I went to great lengths in the beginning of my career to try and make that happen. So I can remember there was one day that it was very, it was probably like 9 o'clock in the evening, probably about June or so. And I really wanted to do something to show a landscape. I wanted to do some sort of interactive activity to have kids like, create a landscape out of sand and to model how something would change if we added water to that landscape. And this is coming to me at 9 o'clock at night. I was like, I need to make this happen. And I lived in an apartment building and in the city of Toronto. And I was like, where do I get sand? Like, I need sand for this to happen. And I went and I grabbed a Tupperware and I went across the street to my local park with a teaspoon and started spooning sand into a Tupperware because I had to make this thing happen for the next day. Years later, I have upgraded to my sand table over here, and we do all sorts of types of things with our sand table. But, I was like, well, this is all I've got, and I'm making this happen. And a few years after that, I'm like, you know what would be great? Let's do a GPS scavenger hunt type of activity, or a like a geocaching type of thing, because I had these eTrex handheld Garmin units. So again, I'm working on these things very late at night, and I made a whole bunch of like little geocaches that I was going to distribute around the schoolyard, and I ended up putting them into an LCBO bag because I just happen to have a plastic bag. And so you got to get there early because you don't want the kids to see you, hiding these things. So it's dark because it's like November, and here I am pulling Tupperware out of an LCBO bag and hiding it under trees. I got a lot of looks, and I think somebody may have called the police even, because they're like, what is happening right now? But again, I was like, this is going to be great. Kids are going to love this. It's going to be so good. So we go to a lot of lengths. I'm sure many of you have gone to Walmart as well at 10 o'clock at night and grabbed a bunch of plasticine and straws and whatever, because you're going to build something the following day for your class. And I did that many times. I spent 5 hours creating a Price is Right game that was all very true to like the different games on the Price is Right, just to review some content for a grade 12 class, because I just wanted my class to be exciting. And I spent much of my time doing stuff like this. And the thing is, I wanted kids to be doing. I wanted them to be engaging. I wanted them to be interacting. But there were a lot of other things that were happening in the background around the same time that this was going on. One was that my ESL students were not doing well, and I didn't know what to do about it. Coming out of Teachers College, I didn't have a great background in ESL and making accommodations, and I felt terrible about it, but I just didn't know what to do. I found that I was missing curriculum expectations. I wasn't getting them done because I was spending so much time on engagement and making sure my class was delightful that I wasn't always getting to everything that I needed to, which was a problem. And the other thing was too that I wasn't checking in on projects as they were going along. It was sort of like, well, once this is summative, once it's done, it's done. And you need to be having that dialogue with students about their work as it's going along. I didn't do that. But I think probably the most important thing is that I wasn't giving kids second chances in learning, but I didn't have the experience or the wisdom yet to realize that this was a problem. So moving along from here, I started to think about, do your personal values about education, like the things that I really believe about education and geography, and the teacher I want to be, do they actually line up with what I was doing in the classroom? And I think about that a lot. Or do we sometimes get diverted because of red tape, or we get diverted because of, regulation or policy about things, and we start to lose sight of those reasons why we became a teacher or what we wanted to see happening, in our classroom. And I found that, I needed a change after a while. It was a question of like, I was going to conferences, I was networking with people, I got great ideas, I was shifting my program, shifting it. It was never the same thing twice. It was certainly getting better over time, and my assessment and evaluation was getting better. I was always looking for new and relevant content, but I was getting tired. I was getting burnt out. And at the end of the day, I was still the person who was in control of the learning. I controlled the learning, I controlled the goals, I controlled the process and the deliverables. And really, how does that align with my goal, right? Or my vision for what I thought education should be? And so I was getting to this point where I was stuck, I was bored, I was jaded. I was working all the time, many, many hours just to, you're putting in, I'm sure you've done this too. You build something for like, 2 hours for like a 20-minute activity. And you're like, oh, I hope this really is high yield at the end of it. And I was just getting tired. And I'm like, there needs to be a better way. And so one evening, one of my friends came over and we were talking about education. He wasn't a teacher. And he's like, I found something that, I think that you could really benefit from. And he's like, there's a guy named Ken Robinson, and you may have heard of him before. And he talks about education. He talks about how school is killing people's creativity. And I'm sure you may have come across this. And if you haven't, listening to him is absolutely inspirational. He's like, you should watch this because he talks about the need for education to go through a revolution. Like, we can't continue on this path. Kids are not enjoying school the way it is, and it doesn't serve our needs anymore, right? You're getting burnt out and jaded, and you're a good teacher, but we can't continue like this. He's like, you should watch this. So I'm just going to show you a few minutes of it because this was something that turned my life around and it turned my career around very, very quickly because of the inspiration of this little video. So I'm going to put myself on mute and I'm going to press play and I'm going to go back over to the screen. Can you just type and see if you can hear it? Because the presentation should pick up, I think, through here, but just let me know if you cannot hear it. It's okay. I'm not gonna. So I would love to show it to you, but when I transferred my presentation over to a Google presentation, obviously it didn't want to pick up the link. So that's okay. I will continue on. I'm just going to. You could see the name of the video here. So this is like somebody did, like, where they draw in the background when somebody's explaining something. It's that, but it's the Changing Education Paradigms by Sir Ken Robinson. And yeah, it was absolutely life changing. And so I would say from minute 6:35, I'm just going to put it in the chat here. So um, 6:35 to, like, I think 10:40 is really what it's about here. And it was so basically what he talks about is like, why do we have the same education model when, oh, thank you, Lise, for putting that in there. Why do we have the same education model when we're not in a predominantly industrial society anymore? All of our times are being monitored by, kids are the same age, so they go to the next level up. It's not by ability. Our times are, it has to do with bells, it has to do with so many periods, it has to do with all these things, which are all very much preparing people for the industrial society that we have. Like, the education system is modeled around that. And so the point that he basically makes is, we need a revolution in education. We can't continue to be doing the same thing, or just, we kind of change it. Like, it has to be completely upended if we want to see some change happening. And so this thought stayed with me, and I was like, oh yeah, like like, wow, yeah, you really can't just, continue to tweak, because I was already doing that and I was getting tired out and nothing was really changing. So I kind of put that on the back burner. And then I went to an OAGEE conference, which is like our provincial conference for geography that happens a couple of times a year. And I met a gentleman named Christopher Federico, and he was doing a presentation on wicked problems, which I didn't really understand, but I later came to understand that it's about design thinking, essentially. But he was doing a workshop where he was literally walking people through, how do you take like a difficult problem and then you teach it, you get the kids to work with this problem and come up with a solution, and look at all of this learning that's happening. So he was talking about, okay, well, if here's the big problem, what do we need to know about in order to answer this big question? And it was just so captivating the way he talked. And he was just, again, it was a workshop. We were all working through it together. And then it was like, okay, let's go and do our research. And what did we learn about this little question that had to do with this? And so now that we know all these things, how do we solve this problem that we started out with at the beginning? And I was just captivated. And I leaned over to my colleague and I said, I want to be this guy. and I want to do this. And he's like, okay. And it was incredible. And so I kept in touch with him and I said to him, wow, your presentation was great. I really want to do this with my students. Would you be able to come and talk with our heads group? And so he came and spoke with our bunch of geography heads about this. And there were a number of us that were kind of inspired. And I said, I want to flip my program into this, like this problem-based, inquiry-based pathway, because I think that it puts students right in the middle of the learning. But I'm scared to do this because it's completely different from what I've done before. Would you keep in touch? And he was very amenable today. He's like, absolutely. I'm like, can I show you my plans and stuff like that? And he was great. And 2 years later, we actually ended up doing a presentation together at OAGEE to talk about, how do you do inquiry-based learning? What does it look like? And what are the challenges? One of the resources that I read that I would suggest to you, if you are thinking about going this direction of inquiry-based learning, is Problems as Possibilities, which is a book that he referenced as well. And I read it and I was like, oh, this very much speaks to things that I'm like, yes, I want to be doing this in my classroom. It's by Linda Torp and Sarah Sage. It's a little bit dated, which also when I read that, I was like, oh my goodness, this has been out on the market for such a long time. And yet we're just coming to the table on this now. So anyway, great read. And I was like, okay, I need to get down to business on this. So I started thinking with this what if mentality, because it can be very freeing. I'm just kind of thinking off the top of my head, if I was going to change my program, what if students came and they had choice every day? And I'm just kind of visualizing my classroom and I'm thinking about what would make that great experience. What if every day students were engaged, but they were doing like real things, right? They had authentic tasks and they were challenged because they wanted to be challenged. And there was this excitement about, what am I going to do today? Well, how am I going to solve this today? What would that look like? And I really wanted kids working like real geographers. What if, these were all the things that, and we could cover the curriculum and we could assess it all with ease, right? So I thought about what would that look like? And again, dreaming is free. So I just wrote these things down and I thought about, again, what I wanted my classroom to look like. And I started from there. And I went and I canvassed my principal and said, I have something kind of crazy that I want to try. And, would you be on board with this? I said, I want to completely rip down my grade 9 program and just start from the beginning. I don't want any tests. I don't want any exams. I don't want any worksheets in my class. I want everything to be problem-based or inquiry-based learning. And I don't know what the A&E is going to look like yet. I'm not really sure, but I'm just so inspired by some things I've seen. I really want to try this. And she was like, okay. And I was like, really, it's that easy. I didn't think it would be. I thought it would be like pushing a stone up a hill, but it wasn't. And she's like, I believe in you. I believe that you can do this. Let's see where it goes. I was like, all right, I've got carte blanche. I can do whatever I want. This opportunity is never coming again. You got to do it. So these are the rules that I set for myself at the outset. Say yes to every opportunity. Whatever came your way, yes. Sometimes I think we get limited. We're like, oh, that comes across your desk and you're like, not really related to my curriculum. Great opportunity, but doesn't really align with an expectation. I don't know. I'm not going to do it. So I was like, no, I'm just going to say yes to everything. I'm going to focus on what's really important here. I'm going to look at all that curriculum in 30 years time. What is the most important stuff here? Right. And that was really freeing too, because it's like, sometimes there's so much stuff in the background to sort out. It's like, no, what is really important here? And then I also came back to Ken Robinson. It can't just be sort of new. It's got to be completely new. You can't be doing the same thing, right? And accept that failure is going to be part of your journey and it's not going to be perfect. And that's okay, because we're all here to learn. All of us are here to learn. And so I started with that piece and kind of rolled out from there. And I decided, okay, well, students aren't going to be free to kind of explore unless they have this sense of community. And so I actually spent a whole week with students. I asked them questions about, what does your ideal classroom look like? What is it that you value about education? What inspires you? So when things get tough, what do you think about? Like, what keeps you going? And I asked all this stuff and I typed it all up and I put it around my classroom to remember students about these things. when things were getting difficult, and I made sure, I was like, whatever they tell you, you need to deliver on it. You can't just be like, oh, that's nice, I'm so glad we did that. I really thought about what they said about, an ideal classroom, and I really did my best, and I'm pretty sure I delivered on most of those things the best that I could. I decided there had to be, this scaffolding of release of responsibility. It can't just be like, oh, here's a big question, here you go, tell me how it turns out. Like, you have to be teaching those processes in the background. And this other piece about just in time learning or education on demand, I don't necessarily know what my class is going to look like that period. They might be in the middle of an inquiry. They might have a question that has arisen that's not necessarily in line with something that I had prepared for. So be okay with that, right? You might have to go on this journey together and be like, I don't know, that's really interesting. Let's see if we can find that out together. And so I said to my students at the beginning of the semester, here are some things I want you to know as we go on this journey that's kind of like, I don't know where it's going to go. Every day counts, right? Every day that you're here and you're showing your learning, you're showing me how you're taking this in, it counts. Because I think sometimes we're like, well, this counts and that doesn't. And I'm speaking from high school teacher experience. So how do I try and capture some of that great conversation that's happening at tables? I got to think about how to do that. We're going to be learning geography by doing geography, right? It's not just going to be you watching. We're going to actually be doing it. And you have to be present, right? You have to be engaged. It's your responsibility to demonstrate, what you have learned and what you've been thinking about and how you've connected it, right? It's going to be important that you ask questions along the way so that I can gauge what your learning looks like. That's what I said. And so we kind of rolled out from there. And I still had units of study organized, and I still used some of the questions from the curriculum documents that were really good, as they were workable as like an inquiry question. Um, and and we tried it like that. So everything that we did was through an inquiry. And there might have been times when I had to present something because it was like good for all. It was something where everybody is going to be presenting their work in this fashion. So in order to do that, you need to learn how to make an effective PowerPoint or something along those lines. So there were a couple of times when I did that, but mainly it was, let's see where the students go with these questions and figure out what to do next. So here's how this turned out. These are the things that I saw that happen. In the classroom, suddenly there wasn't any classroom management problems anymore. Everybody was busy. They all were engaged. They wanted to know the answers to their questions, or they really wanted to find a solution to the problem that they were working with, which was really freeing. So as you know, instead of just behavior management, I was becoming that person again that I always wanted to be with the students while they did their learning. It just brought me back to those things that were important. And I found too that students were excited when you gave them new tools to work with to try and answer their questions. They were excited about it. And sometimes it wasn't just like, using ArcGIS. There are times when there were kids in the hall, they were on the phone to the local grocery store because they were trying to find some answers about what's grown locally and what's being sold locally, because they had a question they were working with that had to do something with sustainable food sources. And so they were learning how to make a phone call, because I think sometimes we forget about that. Kids just, they call each other. They don't really know how to interact with people properly on the phone anymore. So that was a learning experience too. But, they were excited to be doing something like that. And so as a teacher, I felt like there was this greater sense of like what is important, right? And I was more that guide on the side. I wasn't telling it like it is. This is what you need to know. I was the person who was asking questions about their work based on what they were showing me to try and move them forward. Now, what did the students have to say about this? All right, I'm going to let you read this if you can see the screen well. There were some people that were very pleased about me doing a whole program with no tests, no exam, no worksheets, none of that, all inquiry research. And there were some people that were not so happy about it by the end of the semester. So I'll give you a sec just to read that. It's true. Yeah, classroom management kind of evaporates. Yes, I had some really, really nice kids that were like, they saw that I was trying something new, and that, every day was kind of a challenge for me to try new stuff. And Yeah. Yeah. And they were like, keep at it. Yeah, the kid who said that I was the worst teacher ever, the irony of that is actually the parent sent me the nicest email saying, you need to keep pushing the revolution in education because it's important. And I'm like, you need to tell your kid that." So, yeah, so I looked at this and I thought, okay, so there's some stuff that's working here, and there's some stuff that obviously, some people are not engaged, or they're not seeing this in the same way that I am seeing this. So, what do we do about this? So there's those perspectives, but at the end of the day, we also like to look at data to try and figure out if what we're doing is actually helpful. So here's what I saw in the numbers, and also just in everyday observation of my students. Deeper learning driven by student curiosity. The things that students asked me about or they came to on their own through their inquiry work was very advanced in some cases. I'm like, this is not a concept I would teach until grade 11 or 12. And they landed on it because it was relevant to something they were working on. At-risk students, their marks improved greatly. So when we look at like marks for other classes, their geography mark was much, like, it was like across the board for that group of students was much better. So there's some advantages there. Same thing, students with individual education plans scored a lot better. And also too, we were looking at, I was the only class that was doing this. All the other staff in the geography department were continuing with regular program, and we were making some comparisons there. And these students were doing well. One thing that I found was that at this time, there were some students that were kind of doing the bare minimum and they were wasting time. And so I kind of put that away, and I'm like, need to think about that. How do you stop that from happening? So I came back to, I found this awesome quote. And if you haven't read A.J. Giuliani, he's another good person as far as like inquiry-based learning is concerned. Inquiry and Innovation in the Classroom is a book I would highly recommend. But I pulled out this one little quote. "We are currently sitting at one of the most important crossroads in our educational history. It's the most important time to be in education. Albert Einstein famously said, if you always do what you always did, you will always get what you always got." And so I keep coming back to, it has to be a revolution. It can't be kind of different. It's got to be completely different. How do we deal with that? And so that kept me going, right? And so, we know as geography people that we've got a lot of pieces here. We know our subject is important. We know there's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of stuff that we can get students to think about, multiple perspectives on things. We know that systems are interconnected. And so again, I keep thinking about that. This has got to be the better pathway. So I came up with my own inquiry question for our department. And at this time as well, after that pilot, I switched schools because I was looking for a different school with a different timetable. So I switched to a nearby school, and I was like, oh boy, if I say, hey, let's do a whole bunch of inquiry-based learning with a bunch of staff that I don't know in a community of students I don't really understand yet, maybe we should hold off on that. So I did for a year, but then I was like, okay, let's rip this thing down and start some inquiry-based learning here. And so here's the question that I put out to our staff. How might we develop a meaningful and engaging grade 9 geography program that meets our curriculum and evaluation needs without compromising the integrity of the program? And I think that without piece is really important. And that's what makes it a wicked problem and something that's not easily dealt with. And this is, if anybody has gone to York University, this is their slogan. And I have it at the bottom of my email, and I feel it. I feel it every day of my career, right? Tendanda via, the way must be tried. So we tried it. And so we were like, what is the one thing that we could do? Like, if we wanted to try and make our curriculum exciting, like the kids say, inquiry is a lot of work, but it's rewarding, but it's tiring. Okay, how do we make it better? And so we were like, what's the one thing, if we build it, we can see how things change throughout the year. And I'd also done some professional development with Jocelyn about, gamification. And I was really inspired by your presentation, Jocelyn, on gamification. And I was thinking, how can I make this work with inquiry stuff? And so we're like, wait a minute, what if the kids built a city? And we're like, yeah, building a city is good. We could get them to build a sustainable city. They can make choices, whatever. That'd be great. And I'm like, what if they build the city and the city changes throughout the whole semester? Stuff keeps happening to the city as we're working our way through our curriculum. that city has to respond to, oh, there's stuff happening with climate, there's stuff happening with vegetation, there's stuff happening with the economy in that particular region. Wouldn't that keep kids kind of engaged? And so we ended up with a gamified program where we picked, and we literally just opened up Google Earth and we're like, all right, where could we put some cities that aren't so challenging that it's not going to work, but they have access to some transportation, they have access to some water, they have different natural resources around them. What could we do? And we spent an afternoon as a staff and we're peering around looking for places. And we landed on 6 places that we thought, there's only like a little village or a hamlet here. We could get kids to build a sustainable city and then see what happens to it throughout the semester. So the places that we picked, so you can see here, we made sure that they were all across Canada. So Port Clements out on the west coast, Fort Resolution in Northwest Territories, Raleigh, which is in Alberta, southern part of Alberta, Attawapiskat in northern Ontario, Île aux Coudres, which is an island within Quebec, and Muskrat Falls. And the places that we pick all have a challenge associated with them. Sometimes they have a bit of a controversy associated with them too, that makes things a little bit more difficult for kids to do something with. So we just started with, hey, let's gamify our class. Wouldn't that be fun? And then we really refined our locations. So each location was in a different climate region, a different landform region, a different vegetation region. Like we just made sure strategically, it's like this one has this climate, this landform, this vegetation, and so on. Different disasters, because then we're still getting that diversity part where kids are understanding different parts of Canada, but we're able to kind of hone in on a particular location. So all of them had transportation, water accessibility to build from. They all have a different natural resource industry, because that's something that we talk about in our course. And they all have a community of Indigenous peoples that are nearby. And so Unit 1, we're like, okay, here's your area. What can you learn about this community? You need to build a sustainable and livable city without compromising the natural systems. So we're like, do we just give them the question and let them? No, it's like, well, what do students have to know about in order for them to do this job well? And so we broke this big inquiry question up and we taught them about, how do you figure out what you have to learn about in order to do your task? So we looked at, what do you need to know or learn about in order to address this problem? And so we modeled that together. So does anybody know what sustainable communities are? No? Okay, we should probably learn about that. Do you understand what different land uses are in a community? No. Okay, we should probably learn about that. And so we broke it up into all these little questions that students needed to find out about. And then when they were assigned or picked their particular community that they were going to build, then they had more questions, because they started looking at it on a satellite image and looking at maps and said, oh, I wonder where the next nearest community is. Okay, that's a great question. You probably want to know that for trade, right? What kind of natural resources are in the area? We need to look that up. And they just started discovering inquiry for themselves, because it was important at this point. They had a reason. Your job is to build a sustainable community. You got a lot of questions that you need answering. And so they just dove right in. And so the idea is we start our course with them building this community, and they do it in a team of students, and then they share that community. After that, then students take on that community. So our students are all in different groups, but we didn't want them to stay with a community for the whole semester. So we're like, well, we want them to move to different communities. So then we would create new groups and then move those kids to, here's the community that your friends designed, and now it's yours. What are you going to do with it in Unit 2? And so it got kind of exciting. And there's in terms of like geographic inquiry, we were doing it all, right? They were looking at photos, they were looking at maps, they were, looking at population pyramids and demographic data, because all of it was important to them with what they were trying to do to keep their community sustainable and alive. And it was funny, because one of the staff members was like, don't you think that when they get the new community that they're just going to like burn it down because it's not theirs? And I said, I don't know. That's a good point. Maybe they would. None of them did. They all wanted to make it better than the last group, and they were all just so keyed into it. And so here's what my classroom looked like. This was from a few years ago. All of this has been moved digitally now. So we used to actually hand draw all of our maps, our land use maps. Now we use Google My Maps to create our land use, and then we just share them with the different groups of kids and then turn off the permissions as they're not in that group anymore. But everybody was kind of gathering around one area. These guys down here, this person was actually in a different group, and he came over here because he was like, what are you guys doing to my community here? Like, what are your plans? So everybody was really very engaged. And so we just worked all of our content through that. So our second unit is about physical geography. And during that time, they elect a mayor for their community. And the mayor gets to have certain privileges about deciding certain things that get built in the community. And then unit 3, they have to decide, are you going to do green energy or are you going to do hydroelectric? It depended on what their community was, what the options were, because it's all real. It's all based on where these places actually are in Canada. All of it's real. Right? Attawapiskat, are you going to do a mining project? Are you going to try paper mill? Or are you going to try cranberry farming? And so they have to come together and have a discussion about what they're going to do here. And it's all based on inquiry. You have to learn about what the options are to make a choice. So they are all into it because they were interested to see how it turned out. This we've scrapped. We've changed this. We used to have them make like a population, there was, each community had a population issue that needed to be dealt with, but we've changed that since then. So that's basically the shell of our program. But then we've got all these other extra things. So kids get to buy stuff that they can put into their community. So every Friday, they get to buy like more commercial land if they want, or they can buy more residential land, and they can choose where they want to put those things. But they earn money by doing the things we want them to do in class, which is being accountable, doing homework if needed, collaborating. And so we would give money to groups that basically were doing the learning skills things that we needed them to do. And again, the classroom management problem just kind of disappeared because everyone's like, we want a lot of money because we want to build our community. And they were very excited about stuff like that. So in the beginning, I used to have like Monopoly money, and I would just, dole it out. And then the numbers got really big. And so we had to actually move it on to like a Google spreadsheet where they could put the money that they were earning and the money that they were spending and stuff like that. Every Friday, they roll a die to see if they get a consequence. So there's different things that happen to the community. And basically they would roll a die. And if they rolled a 1, 3, or a 5, they got a consequence. If they rolled a 2, a 4, or 6, they did not get a consequence. But basically I wrote a bunch of things that were possible in that geographic region of their community. And it had something to do with a geography lesson that they should learn. So for Raleigh, I said it's been a dry summer in Raleigh. Climate change is challenging wheat farming in the area. Deduct $500 from your income, but has also taken a toll on the natural vegetation in the area. A severe summer thunderstorm that brought hail and many lightning strikes has set the grasslands ablaze in your area. It has not touched your city, but has charred the natural area bounded by Highway 2 to the west, Highway 505 to the north, and the river reservoir to the east. What will you do? And so I give them 2 choices. And they have to work together to solve their problems. So that's how we spend our Fridays, is dealing with those pieces. And if they don't get a consequence, usually they're spending time updating their land use map, buying things, expanding their community. So we also have the great book of consequence as well. And they can pull out, this is a David's tea thing. And so they can pull out a drawer and they can pull out a consequence for that. Trying to keep things engaging, right? And then we added motivating Mondays, where they had like a problem solving task to do as well, where they could earn like $10,000 for their community if they had the best solution, but it's only a 20-minute activity. They had to move really, really quickly to do it. Kids like that. And then recently we added badges. So again, if you built like the most sustainable hospital design, you could get a badge for your community. And the more badges your community had, the more money you get for your community. So everybody wants to be constantly helping their group, right? Building their community and spending money, and just doing their work and all these things, because we had all of that stuff. We looked at the behaviors that were undesirable, and we came up with a badge to sort it out. So somebody, I can't remember who said they teach IB. in grade 9, we have a pre-IB class, and we found that kids would do math and science in our geography classes, which annoyed us to no end. So we're like, oh, we're going to just create a badge for people using geography class time to do geography work. Oh, suddenly the math and science books are gone and everybody's doing what they're supposed to do. So we just created a gamified situation to encourage all of that great like collaborative work and those soft skills that are really important. So we have accounting sheets. This is our menu of prices of things that students can buy. We've upgraded it. It's got more options on there. And sometimes we change things as we go along, which was kind of fun, right? Inquiry, you can change things on a dime if you want to. We had a sheet that allowed kids to make laws and policies for their community. And then again, this keeps getting passed on to like the next group of students for them to pick up and understand where it gets left off. And then in order for the new group of people to understand where they've been, they had to make like a little report as a group and say, in the last episode, this is what happened to our community. And then they give it to the new group of students and then they read it and they're like, oh, okay, I understand. And then they can ask them questions and stuff too. But this was a good way to get it like a little written task in as well. And I can mark stuff like that too. So the end game, they needed to do a project basically on which community do you think was most sustainable, and they can pick whatever they want, but they had to justify why it was most sustainable. So I'm getting like my opinion piece in there too. And then they did a creative project as well that was more like a bigger, like it didn't have anything to do with the gamified program, but they should be able to answer how and why is Canada a diverse nation from coast to coast in terms of its environment, economy, and society. They should be able to talk about that based on what they have learned that semester. So this is what my classroom used to look like with a bunch of stuff all over the place with things that were in progress. We've since moved that onto Google. But anyway, so at the end of the day, why do stuff like this? Okay, well, we need a revolution in education, right? As we said earlier. But really, it just allowed for so many more possibilities of like, how to evaluate kids. I could do conversations, I can watch them, I can get products from them. So it's more balanced. It's meaningful learning. It's something that's real. They know these places. You could ask any of our kids, hey, what do you know about Port Clements? They have so many things to say about this little dot on a map out west because they feel like they know it now because they worked with it in a meaningful way. Problem solving, skill development, obviously, developing competency in a variety of literacies and skills, like looking at maps, reading documents, like we integrated all of that stuff. Canadian geography from the local and wide to the regional and national context. We're constantly looking at, okay, well, you're here. What does that have to do with this or this? And again, classroom management, right? And authentic engagement. And everybody is just, on board. So something new every day and people are excited by it. Trying to explain it to a brand new teacher coming into our department is something that is going to be challenging, but not impossible, right? So at the end of the day, this is the past, right? When we think about Super Mario, and it was like, with Super Mario, you can't go back, right? It was like the screen moved you along, and it wasn't like you could turn around and be like, oh, I forgot something, I didn't see that, right? That was kind of education of the past. And you'll notice that, in this image, I know it's not quite like that in the game, but Mario, if Mario's the teacher, Mario is leading everybody else here, right? And the teacher is the one in control of how fast that game is moving. But if we look at this, right, Mario Kart, we can think about choose your own adventure, right? Students find a pathway of something that excites them. And there's many pathways in education. And I think that, by shifting from this and me being the leader to being more of a mentor and a guide on the side, kind of an observer or a question asker to help students move along, it's created something that's much more meaningful. And I'm still getting that piece. And it comes back to my core values about why am I a geographer? What does that mean to me? What is my interest in education? And what are my core values? I think doing inquiry-based learning and gamification really meets those different challenges. So I realized that I have talked a lot. I really thought I had a shorter presentation. And it's 11:25, but I will take a look and see what questions people have. And I'm not sure. I'm sorry. It should show my email address. It's not showing it very nicely, so I'll put it in the chat. If you have questions for me, or you are like, you want some materials to try and help you get started on your journey, I am happy to help. Just send me an email. And you can find me on Twitter. I often post like pictures of stuff that we've done up on Twitter when we're in session about, things that I'm excited about, or whatever. I post stuff on there too. But yeah, I hope that this was something that was helpful. Oh yeah, you can read it. So it's Joanna. So I'll just put it in the chat here at wiredsb.ca. So did anybody have anything that you wanted to ask me about? I'm so sorry. I talked a lot. I hope that it was maybe inspiring to you. That was really what my goal was when I think about storytelling. I hope that, not everything played out as well as it could have. So I hope that, while I was experimenting with things about gamification, there was some stuff that kind of blew up, but you learn from it and you just keep moving forward. So I don't know if anybody has anything you want to ask about. If not, I will hang back here if there's anything that you want to talk about. And thank you so much for being a great audience for me and allowing me this platform to share some of my experience in this awesome first virtual conference for CanGeo. Thank you so much. It is a lot to digest. Absolutely.